Welcome to another episode of Farbrengen on Air, Farbrengen on the Sicha. Today, we're going to be talking about bells, pomegranates, and public menorah lightings. We're also going to address a question that was asked to the Baal Shem Tov, why Hasidim sway back and forth during davening. Today, we have a very special guest from Seattle, Washington, Rabbi Shmuly Levitin, who runs CYP Seattle, as well as Chabad of downtown. He also has a weekly Likutei Sichos class in the Amazon headquarters in downtown Seattle. So, Rabbi Shmuly, welcome to the show. It's glad to have you on. How are you?
Thank you. It's beautiful to be on this program. Like Rabbi Yossi just mentioned, I am Chabad of downtown and Chabadian professionals of Seattle, we do have a weekly lunch and learn at Amazon. Obviously, the last couple of years during COVID, Amazon, actually their offices are still closed. They were supposed to be reopened in this month, actually last month in January, but because of Omicron, it was pushed off even more. But for years, I had an ongoing lunch and learn there. I still actually do it on Zoom now. And most of the lunch and learns were actually the Rebbe's talks, the Rebbe's Sichos. It was very powerful. And like I would tell the guys all the time, that to learn the Rebbe's Torah in the heart of corporate America, literally the most one of the most progressive companies in the world, was just an unbelievable thing. So it was very, very powerful and very illuminating for everybody that came. So it was great.
Amazing. So I want to jump straight into this Sicha. The Sicha is a very powerful Sicha. And if you could give us a little background as to how the Sicha starts off with the robe of the Kohen Gadol, the robe of the high priest, and as well as, according to Rashi and Ramban, how they learn the hem of the robe.
So there's a verse actually in this week's Torah portion, Parshas Tetzave, and it talks about the various garments, unique garments of the high priest. You know that a typical priest, a typical Kohen had 4 garments. And the high priest was unique that he had 8 garments. So he had 4 additional garments. And one of those garments we're going to talk about today in this talk of the Rebbe is it's called a me'il. It's considered like a cloak, loosely translated into a cloak. It was a garment that would cover, kind of go around the neck and go all the way down to the bottom of the legs of the Kohen Gadol. And on the bottom of that cloak, and that's what we're going to talk about today, the Torah tells us that you shall make pomegranates of tchelis on its hem, all around the hem, with bells of gold between them all around. So the bottom of this long tunic, this me'il, the verse literally says, God commands us to make on the bottom of that garment, kind of like pomegranates of tchelis wool, and with bells going all around. Now there's a debate between Rashi and the Ramban how exactly this worked. Rashi is of the opinion that when it says all around the hem with bells of gold between them, that means you had pomegranates and then bells, pomegranates and then bells. Rashi literally translates that there were 2 items. There was the pomegranates, hollow pomegranates on the bottom of the tunic, the bottom of the me'il, and in between each pomegranate, 2 pomegranates, there was a bell. So there were 2 independent items. You had the pomegranates, the bell, pomegranates, bells that were on the bottom of this tunic. The Ramban argues on Rashi, and he is of the opinion that actually the bell was inside of the pomegranate. That when the Torah says in between them, all around it with bells of gold between them, he literally is the bell of the gold was in the pomegranate. They were the same item. That's kind of the external version of the debate. That's what they're debating about. How did this work? And that's the debate.
So what was the function of these bells? Why were they placed on the bottom? What did they serve?
So the verse continues, actually. It says that the reason the bells were there is that their voice should be heard, or their noise should be heard when the Kohen Gadol came into the sanctuary, the Kodesh, the holy part of the temple where he did most of his service. So whenever he was moving around, you have these bells on the bottom of the garment, they would cling. And the verse literally tells us that we're supposed to make these bells on the bottom of the garment, so you will hear the Kohen Gadol coming, And because of that, he will not die. So it seems like it's a very fundamental thing. In other words, if you're missing this part of the garment, it's so severe that it could almost be mean that he would be capital punishment for such a thing. So in other words, it was a very integral part of the service. And the verse says the reason is that specifically we should hear the Kohen Gadol moving around. That's literally what the verse says.
So it's interesting. So here comes the Kohen Gadol during the service during the year, not on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur he didn't have the bells. So the Kohen Gadol is in Kodesh, is in the Beis Hamikdash, and everywhere he turns, he makes a turn to the right, he makes a turn to the left. There's noise.
Yeah.
So that means the whole day, as long as the Kohen Gadol was serving in the Beis Hamikdash, the whole day there was a kind of noise, a kind of sound from the bells.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely, that's interesting. You mentioned that because we know that the Kohen Gadol had the 4 garments that a typical priest has, and in addition, he had another 4. And like Rabbi Yossi was mentioning, on the Yom Kippur service, many times in many parts of the service, specifically when he would go into the inner sanctum, which he only did once a year on Yom Kippur, he would not wear those 4 extra garments. He would only wear the garments of a simple Kohen. So he kind of wore both. He wore, and it talks about, if you ever follow along with the Machzer on Yom Kippur, it goes through the detail his whole service. He had to go to the mikveh between every time he changed the garments, but there's times in the services where he wears the 4 garments when he goes into the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies, and the rest of the service in the main sanctuary, he wears all 8 garments. Yes, absolutely. But obviously, whenever he's wearing the garment with the bells, you can imagine, just imagine,
right.
Imagine bells on the bottom of a garment. It's clinging, you know.
Right. So the question the Rebbe asks in Ois Gimel, l'cha'oida, at first glance, it seems that when you go to the palace of the king, you go to the Beis Hamikdash, there should be a certain humility. It should be quiet. You're standing in front of God. You're standing in front of the Eibishter. You shouldn't have all this noise. So what's the significance? Why did the Kohen Gadol wear at the bottom of his coat, bottom of his robe? Why did he wear these bells? What's the purpose of noise during the service in the Beis Hamikdash, where it should really be like Shemoneh Esrei? When you're doing the Amidah, when you're davening at the highest point of davening, it's quiet.
Yes, that's a great question. And actually, I just wanted, before I address that question, we talk about it and open up this talk. This talk of the Rebbe is just an unbelievable, incredible sikha. Now, this is just the Rebbe's view, and the Rebbe's, like we say in the yeshiva terminology, derech halimud, or his way of study, of his unique way of how he taught Torah. In this talk, you actually see it in its full representation or full expression. And it opens up basically with a debate, like we mentioned in the beginning, a debate between the Ramban and Rashi as to what was happening. What did it even look like on the bottom of this meal? What did these bells look like? What did these pomegranates look like? And the Ramban comes and asks on Rashi, and he says like this, that according to Rashi's interpretation, that the pomegranates did not have a bell inside of it. So that means that really the pomegranates had no utility, right? They weren't a bell, right? We understand the bells at the ring because it was part of the service, the bell's ringing, but the pomegranates didn't have a bell inside of it, according to Rashi. So comes along the Ramban and he says that if it's only for decorative purposes, in other words, it's not for a part of the service of some sort of sound. It's just literally, you remind him, the pomegranates are decoration. So on that, he asks a very interesting question. And he says, if it's just for decorative purposes, first of all, he says, why are they hollow? Because Rashi mentioned that they're hollow. If they're hollow, why are they hollow? Let them be full. It's a decoration. Number 2, he says, why are they pomegranates? Let them be apples. Golden apples, he says. If it's for decoration, to be golden apples. That's his question. And the question is, why, and we ask on the Ramban is, which is the Mizrahi, which defends Rashi in this instance. He says, what does the Ramban mean that if it's for decorative purposes, it should be apples? And he says, why are apples better than pomegranates? It's a weak question. The question itself is the answer. In other words, don't sit there and ask me, if according to you it's for decorations, it should be apples. Why are apples better than pomegranates? That's what he asks. And that's kind of how this discussion opens up, that according to Rashi, the Raminim were for decorative purposes, and according to Ramban, they were not for decorative purposes. The Raminim were part of the action going on. They were part of the actual bow. And the Sikha opens up, turning that question back into Rashi, Why does he learn that it's only decoration? Why does he not learn like the Ramban? And also, what's this whole concept of the apples and the remindum? And we're going to talk about that more at a mystical, even a deeper level. What do apples represent? What do remindum represent, etc. But getting back to your original question, which was the general question that the noise, what Rabbi Yossi was saying, and this is something that Rabbi addresses in the talk as well, is that seemingly in the service of God, there's no place for noise. Service of God, things are supposed to be with silence, with a hushed voice. And actually, in one of the footnotes over here, it brings down that, for example, when we daven the Shemona Esrei prayer, right, we're before God, the pinnacle of davening, of the prayer service, we specifically do not make noise. We're very hushed tones, which is understandable. Because when you're in front of God, there's no place for ego or just expression or feelings of self. You want to be more in elements of humility and quietness. And so what's going on here, like you mentioned in the beginning here, anytime the Kohen Gadol move, there's noise all over the place.
Right.
Seemingly there's no place for noise in the service of God. That's how the Rebbe opens up to start this discussion, right? So that's in the second section here. And what the Rebbe does is he brings down, the Ramban actually explains it. The Ramban says that we mentioned in the beginning, the verse actually tells us why it was making noise. It says literally that it had to make noise when he was in the Kodesh, so he shouldn't pass away, which shows that it's very integral. Comes the Ramban and he explains why. This is a separate Ramban, by the way. These are two separate. One Ramban was talking about what do these bells look like, and then another Ramban is why did we need bells? The Ramban explains, and we bring it down in the third section here, that the bells, the utility of the bells was like to announce someone that's coming to the king. In other words, a person doesn't run into the king's throne room unannounced, uninvited. You have to be announced. You have to be introduced. If you run into the king's throne room, you probably walk out a head shorter, right? So you have to come in announced. You have to come in, with preparation. And so that was the utility of the bells. The bells were like announcing the Kohen Gadol that is in God's inner sanctum. That's what
it's like going to a person's house and not knocking on the door, or not calling up before you come to
I'm here.
Yeah, just showing up.
Right. So the Ramban basically explains on a very basic level. It was literally like a messenger for you to introduce you to come into God's palace, to come into God's temple, and God's part of where God is represented. And so he literally says he looks at it as a representation or a place where you're notifying the king that you're coming. And actually, he says, and we can understand. Now you'll ask, why is it? Based on that interpretation, that it's introducing you as you come in, how is it possible then that the Kohen Gadol on the holiest day of the year, on Yom Kippur, when he went now into the holiest place on earth, into the inner sanctum, not just to the general temple, but into the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies, then he did not wear the bells. So how are you going? How does this? It's counterintuitive. How is it that when you're in the general sanctuary, you need someone to let people know they're coming, but when you go into the God's Holy of Holies, the holiest day of the year, then he doesn't need someone to announce him. So Rabbi actually explains that, and he says that, on Yom Kippur, the essence of the Jew is revealed. And the essence of the Jew, like we know, it's explained in many different sources. The essence of the Jew is literally like a child to God. Now, everyone has to announce themselves before they go into the king's throne room. But there's one person that doesn't, or a couple of people that don't, and that's the children of the king. They come in, they run in, they're a mess, and they come in, they don't need anyone to announce them. They come in, it's very clear who they are.
It's their home.
The crown prince runs into the throne room unannounced. On Yom Kippur, every Jew is a crown prince. And therefore, it's like his essence is revealed. Therefore, specifically on Yom Kippur, when even Kohen Gadol is going into a holier place, we don't need the bells, because now it's very clear who's coming and why he's there. The essence is revealed. So that's very interesting. So that's the Ramban's interpretation, what the point of these bells were. So that's an answer to the opening question, which was seemingly there's no place for noise in the house of God. See, his answer is you're right. Basically, the Ramban's approach is you're right. There is no place for noise in the service of God. But these bells weren't really a service. They weren't part of the service. They were kind of an introduction. They were an introduction to the service. They were kind of announcing the Kohen Gadol coming into God's throne room, as it were. So that's how he gets around that issue. The Rabbi comes back around and says that we know that every single element of the Kohen Gadol service was very, very precise. He was representing the whole Jewish people when in the service that he did in the temple. And so to say that these bells, which seem to be very fundamental, like we mentioned, that it says literally in the verse, that if he doesn't have the bells, then he might have to, he was literally liable for capital punishment, for death. So they're very, very important. So it makes more sense that it must be that these bells were not just an introduction. There must be something more to these bells. And it seems like they were part of the service, particularly like you mentioned, they were involved in every service.
Right.
Every time he moved his hand, they were making noise. So basically what we're saying is that it doesn't seem that they were just as an intro. They must have been part of the service. And now the question comes back. Well, if they were part of the service, how is noise part of the service?
Right.
That's where we're holding.
Right. So we have the concept of noise, and then we have the concept of silence. And silence seems more that there's a deeper relationship between the person and the Eibishter. You're closer. When you're closer to something, there seems to be a certain silence. Like we know that teachers, it says in Shulchan Aruch that teachers should teach benachas nishmain. People should teach in a soft, gentle voice. There is or siyag l'chachma shtika, the concept of being aware of your presence and understanding that you're in the presence of holiness. So what is this? And Rebbe comes back to this in Ois Daled. What is this noise? What's the advantage of noise to the extent that it's on the garment of the Kohen Gadol?
Yeah.
So if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, so that's great. So after we just establish that it's part of the service, like you're saying, and how could it be part of the service? As you just quoted all those wonderful quotes, and with values that we have of humility and not making noise, especially in the presence of greatness, and how much more so in the presence of God. How could this be part of the service? So the Rebbe basically explains that it's a very big part of the service, and the reason is because there's two different modes of how a Jew engages with God. One is the straight and narrow, like the Avodas, it's called in terminology of Hasidic terminology, Avodas HaTzadikim, the service of the completely righteous. And they're doing exactly what God wants at all times. And then there's everybody else, which is termed in Avodas bal-teshuva, the Avodah of the penitent, person that's coming back. And that kind of person that's coming from a place that wasn't always straight and narrow, his service is very different than the tzaddik. The tzaddik is quiet, it's hushed tones, it's benachas nishmoyim. Everything's understood. Everything's, like we say, iris bekalim. The light is in the vessel. It's housed by the vessel. Everything brick by brick. It makes sense. But the bal-teshuva is not like that. The bal-teshuva is coming from a place of toxicity. He's coming from a place where he didn't always go the straight and narrow, and he's literally running away. One of the things that mentions here is that someone like similar to someone that's running away from a life-threatening situation. If there's a burning building, a person doesn't walk out of the building, how are you doing? Here's my cup of coffee. He runs out of the building. Sometimes he jumps out of the building. It's loud with a lot of noise. And so therefore it's symbolized, this idea of noise symbolizes the avodah of bal-teshuva, the person that's coming back. And the Rebbe takes it even at a deeper level. And this is beautiful. He says it doesn't have to only literally mean a bal-teshuva, someone that literally sinned, a lot of coming from places of sin and he's running away. Even somebody that is basically doing the right thing. He is only doing the right thing. Maybe he's a Beinoni. Maybe he's the Beinoni al Pitandim, but he still feels feelings of self, of ego, because we all have an ego. We all have an nefesh Bahamas. So we all have layers and traces of ugliness, as it were, of ugliness that we want to run away from, that we're not proud of. And such a person, when he's doing his avodah, it's with a little bit of noise. It's not so banachas. He's struggling, he's grappling, he's trying to get away from negativity. He's trying to get away from toxicity. He's trying to run away from things that are negative. And that person does make some noise, and that's resembled and symbolized in the bells. The bells represented that body of Jews, which is actually a lot of people, large part of the congregation their service is with noise. That's why it's part of it. And the Kohen Gadol, because he was a shliach, the messenger of all Jewish people, he had to represent those people too. And it's so relevant because again, he was representing everybody, that if he didn't have the bells, then he was almost guilty of not being who he's supposed to be. And because if he's not representing every facet and every part of the Jewish people, which include people that make noise, people that are coming from toxic environments and going through inner demons, right? Right. He's not doing his shlichus. He's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. So
I want to jump in the sugya of the bal-teshuva. So there's a famous quote, Rav Tavus b'koach shar. There's an abundance of produce in the power of the ox. That means that the ox is a powerful animal, and the ox is able to produce an abundance of produce. So in Chassidus, in other Maimarim, many times the Rabbeim say that a bal-teshuva, a returnee to Judaism, he's not only coming with the nefesh elokis, with the godly soul, but he's also coming with his nefesh bahamis, with the animal soul. And the animal, since a person is made of both, so there's a certain friction. And when there's friction, there's noise. Like, for example, if you take a ball and you throw it against the wall, so the ball will go even further. Or when you yell in a valley with mountains, so since there's resistance, the noise will be even louder. Whereas if you just yell outside, there will be no resistance. So bal-teshuva is coming with resistance. He's coming with his nefesh bahamis, and there's noise. The nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, wants to remain an animal, wants to remain in its own organism. But the person is sort of having this resistance, and there's noise. And when there is noise, so now the nefesh bahamis is coming with his animal soul, and he's serving God. The animal is getting excited about Yiddishkeit, excited about God. So now there's a big advantage of the bal-teshuva compared to the tzaddik, because the tzaddik, there's no friction, there's no resistance. It's just the godly soul.
Absolutely. And just to point another little example of that, we see the sun shining, and it's hot. There's a sun, it's radiating all these rays of sunlight. But the sun hits the cement. That cement is hotter than the rays that were going till that point. And that's the idea of that when it bounces up against friction, that actually is even hotter. And seemingly you'll say it's farther. What do you mean? The cement's all the way on the bottom. Why is it hotter over there? The reason it's hotter is it's going up against resistance. And sometimes you get the full gamut of something specifically when there is resistance. And that's the depth. So it kind of seems like there's two elements that come out of bal-teshuva. Number one, he's overcoming the challenge, right? He's overcoming challenge. And number two, he's gaining that now he's put into the service also the nefesh bahamis, like you mentioned, right? You now have an animal which has a lot of power to it, aiding you in your service to Hashem. It says, "B'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha." You're supposed to serve God with all your heart, levavcha, with both your yitzers. You should even serve God with your nefesh bahamis, because there's a very big quality that comes out when you have that added effort and power that the animal souls has that not necessarily does the godly soul have. So you're enlisting now the animal soul into your service of God, aside from the fact that you're strengthening your godly soul, because it has to overpower a foe. So two huge benefits come out of that, absolutely. And this is all happening with struggle, because and when it's with struggle comes noise. And I don't know if you mentioned earlier, but the Baal Shem Tov brings down that someone asked him, why do Chassidim sway when they daven? What's with the swaying? And he said, the example given is someone that's drowning.
Right.
Someone that's drowning isn't calm, cool, and collected. They're screaming and yelling and waving their hands. And that's a yid that's davening. The reason, because we're running away, we're struggling, we're grappling, we're trying to deal with our inner issues and elevate ourselves and unlock our potential to connect to God. And it's literally, it says that somebody that's like drowning, and that's similar to this idea of the bells, the noise.
Right. The Baal Shem Tov also says that you don't make fun of someone that's drowning, and he's screaming and he's making noise. On the contrary, it's part of the effort to be saved. It's part of the avodah, and that's the emphasis that the Rebbe is making here about noise. That there is an avodah, there's a service, there's a godly, amazing, beautiful service of the Eibishter with noise. The message of noise is not a negative one, but it actually is a positive message of someone that has some sort of resistance, and he is overcoming that resistance. So noise is the overcoming of the resistance.
Absolutely. Overcoming the challenge, the challenge. And so the noise represents the avodah of the bal-teshuva. And that's the beautiful interpretation of Rashi, that the bells, according to Rashi, the bells were part of the service. They weren't just an introduction. They were part of the service because the bells represent those facets of Jews, that their Judaism comes with noise, because it comes with struggle. And so it is part of the service.
Yeah.
And then the Rabbi continues and it says that's not a contradiction to this that it says Lo Barash Hashem, right? The question was built on this concept of this verse from the prophets. So it says Lo Barash Hashem ki b'kol d'mamadaka, right? It says not with thunder. You won't get is God. God is not found in thunder, but in a still hushed voice. So the Rebbe says unbelievably, but seemingly how are you making noise? If Lo Barash Hashem, God's not found in thunder, God's not found in noise. So how are you making noise? How is noise part of the service? The Rebbe says the diuk there is Lo Barash Hashem, Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the higher name of God. As we know, Chassidic philosophy explains that there's various names of God, and they each represent a different facet or level within God. And Yud Kei Vav Kei is the God that transcends nature, that transcends any type of limitation, which is beyond worlds, right? So Lo Barash Hashem, where we're talking about the level of God, which is beyond the worlds, there you cannot get connected to God and that with noise. There, noise doesn't belong. There it belongs. There, the service, the mode of service, the mode of conduct is hushed voice tones. But when you're dealing with Shem Elokim is the lower world. Like we says, the world, for example, our physical world was created with Shem Elokim, Bereishis bara Elokim, as a Shemayim Vesa'aretz, because Elokim connotes nature, connotes being within this world, connotes limitation. When you're within this world and within that realm, you're connecting to Hashem, there is a place for noise. As we mentioned, the person that's within the world and grappling with those things, that does make noise. So the diuk is Lo Barash Hashem. So that also connects to the fact that, like, for example, it doesn't really say this in the Sikha, but you see most of davening is with noise, right? If you go to any temple, it's noise, it's loud. There's only one part that's very hushed, because most of davening you're doing with a person, right? What are you doing during Pesach D'Zimra? You're supposed to be arousing the nefesh Bahamas, right? You're supposed to be channeling even your animalistic element to serving Hashem. And it comes to Shemona Esrei, that's Havaya. That's where you reach the higher level, which is beyond transcendent level, which is beyond the worlds. And there it's taka hushed. So there is a place for this and there is a place for that. So the higher realms belongs with a hushed, the service should be with a hushed voice more. And when we're dealing more with anything that has to do essentially with our animal soul as well, then there will be elements of noise. And that's actually encouraged. Like the story of the bal-teshuva, of the person that's drowning, you know.
I want to jump in and talk about the Kohen Gadol for a moment, just going back to the Kohen Gadol, and then we'll continue. So here's the Kohen Gadol. The whole year he has these bells, and there's these sounds and noise in the Beis Hamikdash. But the purpose is that the Kohen Gadol represents what you mentioned. He represents all type Jews, every single type of Yid. And his responsibility, it's amazing how the Rebbe often in Sichos talks about the underdog, always constantly addressing different angles of the underdog, the Jew that may be far, the Jew that may not be so connected and spiritual. Even that person is super connected on the highest level to who? To the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol is wearing on his garments, he's wearing all type people. It's connected, it's sewed into his garments, all type people, and the noise represents how the Kohen Gadol is focusing, addressing, connecting constantly to every single type of Jew.
Absolutely, and this is something that you see very much, very often in the Rebbe's approach in the Rebbe's Torah. That specifically, that first of all, every Jew is not whole if another Jew doesn't have Yiddishkeit. This is something actually I mention a lot. I never saw it mentioned in Sikha so much, but it's a mission. It's a brief idea, but we'll bring out this concept. If you ever went to a synagogue, typical Orthodox synagogue, you'll notice that at the end of Friday night services, the chazan makes kiddush. There's many temples, many shuls, they make kiddush. And people hear Kiddush, and yet people go back home and they make Kiddush again. Now, Kiddush is a biblical commandment. It's expressing a biblical commandment that we're supposed to sanctify Shabbos when it comes in. And the sages explain it to me that we should sanctify it how do we sanctify it? With a glass of wine. Seemingly, that person in Shul already discharged his obligation by hearing Kiddush in Shul. How can he go back and make the mitzvah again and make Kiddush for his wife? It's almost like a bracha levatil. He's wasting, he's saying God's name in vain. He already discharged his commandment. And so the explanation is, if you open up any mishnayos and brachas or whatever, there's two types of brachas. There's brachas hanenin and brachas hamitzvos. Birchas hanenin is you take things that you take pleasure for in this world. Anything you take pleasure for in this world, you have to make a bracha. An apple, a scent, a smell, that's why you make the bracha by Abdullah. Anything you take pleasure, you make a bracha. Right? That's called birchas hanenin. It's also called birchas hamitzvahs. We make a bracha on a mitzvah. So we make a bracha before we light Hanukkah candles. We make a bracha on Kiddush. We make a bracha. We make brachas before you shake the lulav. We make a birchas hamitzvahs. Right? Now the rule of thumb is that you can't make a bracha unless the bracha connects to you. Right? You, for example, you cannot make a bracha on an apple for somebody else.
Right.
What you can do is make a bracha on an apple for yourself and include someone into your bracha. So you can swipe someone into your, but you can't just make it for them because you're not found in that bracha. It's not for you. It's for them, right? And you have to have representation in the blessing you're making. So you can never make birchas hanenin just for somebody else. But when it comes to mitzvahs, suddenly you are allowed to make a bracha for someone else. In this example, the guy already heard Kiddush and Shalom. Why is he allowed to go home now and make a bracha? It's only for his wife. Seemingly, it's a bracha in vain. He already discharged the mitzvah. So the Mishnah says an unbelievable thing. The Mishnah says, no, this is revealed parts of the Torah. This isn't some Hasidic thing. This is the Mishnah. This is everything. It says, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zalazah. There's a principle called every Jew is responsible for another. And so when you're making Kiddush for your wife, why are you allowed to make Kiddush for your wife? Seemingly, you already discharged your obligation. And now you're making a bracha just for somebody else. You can't make a bracha just for somebody else. The answer is no. You're not just making it for somebody else because you're responsible for them. So when you're making the bracha for your wife, you're actually also making it for yourself. That means a little part of yourself doesn't have Kiddush till your wife has Kiddush. This is a little part of yourself doesn't have Kiddush till your wife makes Kiddush. So when you're making, you're not just making it for her. You're also making a little bit for you. And this is something that we see all over the Rebbe's Torah, and especially in all these different components, that if we don't look out for our fellow, then we're lacking. Our Yiddishkeit is lacking. It's not just like we're a Yiddishkeit, so we have to make sure that's true. But we don't have a Yiddishkeit if the next guy doesn't have a Yiddishkeit. We don't have a complete Yiddishkeit if the next guy doesn't have a Yiddishkeit. Here we see it actually on full display. The Kohen Gadol couldn't do his service without those bells. Those bells were an integral part of his service because if those Yidden are not included in his service, then he's lacking something very, very fundamental.
Wow, beautiful. So let's jump back into the Kohen Gadol, the bottom of So he goes into the Knesset LaKodesh. So Knesset LaKodesh going into the Beis Hamikdash, the service is with noise.
Yep. So when he goes into the sanctuary, the service is with noise because, as we mentioned, a big part of he's representing all the Jewish people, and he also needs to include the Jewish people that are making noise. Now, let's get back to our original question. What was the original question of the Sikha? Essentially, there's a debate between the Ramban and Rashi. The Ramban seems to think that there is no place for noise in the actual service. That's debate number one.
Right.
And point number two he makes is that if indeed that these remaining these pomegranates were just for decorative purpose, they should have been apples. So what's happening? Our question was, what is this? What do apples represent? What do pomegranates represent? Why does Ramban choose that apples should be the decoration if it's a decoration, whereas Rashi sticks to his guns and say it's a decoration? It can be a decoration, still only be reminded. What's going on over here? So the Rebbe basically explains that again, these Jews that were on the bottom of the meal. So another part of the Sikha, the Rebbe explains that we talk about the bottom of the meal. The reason why these bells are on the bottom because they represent the Jews that are on a lower level. That's why they're on the bottom of the tunic.
Fringe.
On the bottom of the garment, the fringe of the garment. Because again, these are Jews that are at the bottom. That's why they're making noise. These are people that are running away from certain things, from certain negative things. So on the bottom of the meal, the bottom of the garment. Now, Rashi basically, the difference between the Ramban and Rashi in their what they're trying to do with their explanations. So we know from their intros, Rashi is there for a 5-year-old child. He is there to explain the verse on a very literal level. He only came to explain the simple explanation of the verse. If you ever open a literal translation of the Torah, you literally will not understand what's going on. You know those books that literally just have, it's very difficult to understand what's happening. Rashi is saying, I'm going to let you get through the text on a very basic level. The Ramban openly says that his interpretation is not just for the basic level, but it's even for a more mystical, deeper interpretation. So they have different goals and what they're trying to do with their interpretation or their explanation on the Chumash, on the verses. So the Rabbi therefore says that according to Rashi, when we're talking about the Jewish people, these people that are making noise, right? We're talking about the bells of the Jewish people that are at the bottom, that are on the bottom of the tunic. They are represented in a remain, in a pomegranate. According to Ramban, which he goes a little deeper. He would say that such Jews should be represented in an apple. What's the difference between an apple and a pomegranate? So we know that Jewish people are compared sometimes to pomegranates, and they're sometimes compared to apples. When they're on a very high level, in a godly level, like a very devout high level, then they're compared to apples. It's brought down in various sources, Kabbalistic sources, also Hasidic sources, that when we're on a very godly level, we're compared to apples. When the Jewish people are on a lower level, a more level that has to do with, again, grappling with struggle, in a struggling level, then they're represented, and we have clear Ma'amar Chazal that they're represented in the pomegranate. Rashi, that is literally, because he's the simple explanation. So that means when he looks at such Jews, when he wants to represent the Jews that are on the bottom of the mill, he looks at them literally, how you see them, right? How you see them on a literal level, they're Reminim.
Pomegranates, right?
They're pomegranates. They have coming from Chelek. And that's literally what it is. His purpose is to explain the literal text, and he's going to explain them in a literal level. So those Jews are pomegranates, right? Like it says, how do we know what's the Ma'amar Chazal? The Ma'amar Chazal is that it says kapela harimein rikasech, like a eyebrow, a split of an eyebrow. What's the blessing? Split of an eyebrow is your the Talmud translates rikasech means your rekonim shabach, the empty ones, right? So kapela harimein, a pomegranate is like your empty ones, and the Talmud continues to say, not only the empty ones, but even Peshe Yisrael, even the sinners of Israel are compared to a pomegranate, because even the sinners of Israel have mitzvahs like a pomegranate. So Remain means the Jew on the lower level. Again, apple represents the higher level. So Rashi, when he's talking about these Jews on the bottom of the mill, he says, okay, they're Remain. He's willing to say they are represented in Remain. The Ramban, which looks at things at a more mystical, deeper level, he says that even such Jews, you can't look at them how they look on the outside. On the outside, you're right. They're going through various struggles, whatever it is. But on the inside, every Yid has a neshama, we know. Every Yid has a soul, which is always whole. And at that inside level, then it's a golden apple. And so if you're going to represent those Jews, why choose the external shell and the literal shell that they have? Let's dig a little deeper, like the Ramban's approach. Again,
right.
How they learn that they should be represented better in an apple. And that's that debate right there, right? So right. Rashi looks at it is on the more literal, so it's represented in a remain, and the Ramban looks at it as an apple. And so that's that idea there as well. Now the Rebbe, this is like an unbelievable sikha, because what the Rebbe does as he continues is he says, so on an external level, the way it looks is you have Rashi, which is literal. So he's talking about these Jews, the bells that are making noise. On a literal level, they are represented in remain. The Ramban is arguing and saying that they let them be represented in tapuach, into something. Let's look at their deeper level. Let's look at their deeper. I understand they have a remain part, but let's look at their deeper level. But the Rebbe actually, as he continues, he says, and this is something that he does. He doesn't actually call this Yena Shel Torah in Rashi, but he is doing that here. And he actually says that not only is Rashi looking at it on the literal level, because Rashi's literal, he's Pshutei Shel Mikra, and therefore you have to only look at the literal, which on the literal level, these people are comparable to remaining. But actually, there's even, like we know from Rashi, there's the literal parts of Rashi, but within Rashi itself, you have the craziest depth called Yena Shel Torah. The Yena Shel Torah of Rashi, which the Rebbe many times in many Sichos Rashi Sichos, the Rebbe brings out the Yena Shel Torah. Here he says basically, not only does Rashi choose to represent these Jews and remind him because he's literal, and therefore he has to look at them the way they look literally, but actually there's the zenith, or the highest level that a Jew could reach is this level of the reminder, of the noise.
Right.
And actually, I'm not just choosing to express them in remain because of the deficiency, but I'm choosing to express them in remain because of the unbelievable high level they have of the level of bal-teshuva. And the Rebbe, it continues over there, as we're above over here, that apples, or the way of silence and stillness, and this derech, or the way of service to God, of the more still, hushed approach, it seems higher, like we say, it seems like it's a higher level, a higher mode of conduct. Actually, it has certain deficiencies. And maybe Yossi, you want to go elaborate on that. Two types of deficiencies of them being limited, right? It's very composed. It's very, like we say in this Eris Bekalim, the lights in the vessels. It's very, mesiashos, restful.
Right.
Seder v'adraga, brick by brick, moving along the straight and narrow. It's very composed, but that itself has a deficiency because that connotes limitation. Whereas the bal-teshuva that's flinging his arms and he's drowning like the Baal Shem Tov, the example of the Baal Shem Tov, he may have that deficiency of not having that orderly conduct and that seder and that that hushed tone and that isyashvus where everything belongs where it should. But he has that precisely because he doesn't have that. He has the added element of believable, beyond limitation. He's not limited. He's not in a box. He's beyond limitation. So the Rebbe basically says the Rima is a mila. The Rima is not. Rima on the outside looks Pesha Yisrael, the Rima, and the Ramban is looking at a deeper level, Stapuach. No, the truth is, on an even deeper level, there's a mila in that rash, in that noise, in that element, which is beyond limitation.
And I think that's the chiddush in this sikha, the novelty, where what the Rebbe is bringing out is he's in a way he's flipping the whole script. The Rebbe is saying, okay, until now there's a curled mamadaka, there's the silent, there's the tzaddik, he's the good guy, and the bad cop is the one, the Rasha, or the one who struggles, animal soul, and we brought out the advantage. Until this point, we brought the advantage. We said that we need to have them in the Beis Hamikdash. We need to have all type of Jews. It shows on something positive. Here, the Rebbe in Zion, the Rebbe is saying even more. Not only do we need them involved, do we need all type people involved, but there's a specific, when you're looking at the person, there's something going on in the person, in the person with noise, in the non-tzaddik, the non-perfect person. There's something infinite about what's going on. There's something because he's breaking boundaries. He's actually growing and becoming something greater than himself. The tzaddik is already there. It's like in Chassidus we say Yisrin ha'or min ha'choshech. There is the light that comes from darkness is even more potent. For example, if you walk into a room and it's dark, you turn on the light. The light is a very strong, very bright light. So the advantage here of the bal-teshuva is not only that there's something positive of his service, but on the contrary, there's something greater in the totality of his service. There's something even greater than the tzaddik because he's completely breaking boundaries where the tzaddik is going one step at a time and is connected, but it doesn't have that noise. So noise is actually a sign of infinite connection to God.
And then the Rebbe also quotes over there, and it's also brought down in the footnotes here, that this is one of the explanations why it says that the place where a bal-teshuva stands, even a tzaddik gomer can stand. Even a complete tzaddik is not on the same level as the bal-teshuva. And the reason is this, that the tzaddik is, yes, he's going seder v'adraga, and he has eris bekalim, his bisashvos, he has everything composed, but he doesn't have this believable element. And the bal-teshuva is coming from a place, the opposite, for a negative place. He's running to God. The example given is like, give a glass of water to somebody that's living in the city. It doesn't mean much to him, but give a glass of water to somebody that's been traveling 2 weeks in a desert. How precious, how unbelievable is that water? We can't even fathom. Well, we do have a little bit. I mean, the first glass of water after Yom Kippur, Right. You can't compare that to the glass of water on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of Cheshvan. And that's what a bal-teshuva has. He's excited. We see this many times. He's excited with his Yiddishkeit. He's doing it with passion. There is a believable element in his Yiddishkeit. It's just beyond, it's shattering all limitations. And so it's not just that these people, like you're saying, that these people also need representation. Right. But and without them, the Kohen Gadol's avodah isn't complete. Right. But at a certain level, these people have an advantage. They have an advantage, and that's why his avodah isn't complete. Not because we also need them, but without them, we're missing something very integral. Not just because we're missing somebody, but we're missing like the key player now. Yeah. So it's very fundamental, and that's a big flip on its head. Absolutely, that's a very different way of looking at the world and looking at people going through just human life. And the potential that a person has to reinvent himself, and how you wind up on a higher level when you actually do that reinventing, even higher than the person that just everything was making sense the whole time.
So I just want to end with the ches ois ches, where the Rebbe and I want you to give some insight here. The Rebbe talks about ikvus de Mashiach, before Mashiach comes. Actually, perhaps the quote "When in Rome, do like in Rome" is found in this sikha. The Rebbe quotes the Gemara about Rome and the noise and the rash and the intensity, and we have to. And in Yiddishkeit, we must match up to the intensity.
Yes.
So if you could elaborate a little bit on that about Miftoyim, also mitzvah tanks, and as we started in the beginning of the Sikha, we spoke about public menorah lightings, the idea to go out into the streets. If you could just elaborate a little bit on that.
So the Rebbe actually says, so ice test is like the last ice of this, or second to last two ices, test and test. The Rebbe basically says that there is this specific instruction from this whole Sikha to our generation. And that is, the Rebbe says there's people that understand that in our generation, the last generation before Mashiach, we're the bottom of the tunic, we're Shmuly Hameil. It's understandable that we can't suffice with our own Yiddishkeit, and that we also have to go out and bring others that don't have a Yiddishkeit, bring them close and give them the opportunity to experience their Judaism. People understand that. What they don't understand, when they sometimes question, is why does it have to be done with such noise? Why does it have to be done so publicly?
Right.
And like Yossi mentioned, I haven't had a chance to look at the original text, but I remember when I learned this many, many years ago, I think in the original text of the Sikha, the unedited part, I think that Rebbe does mention mitzvah tanks. And he says that people want to understand why he's walking down Fifth Avenue and he hears, because mitzvah tanks always come with noise, with signs. It's like a big deal. I know I do it every year, Hanukkah in downtown Seattle. Everyone's wondering what's going on. They love it. But it's interesting. Like, why does it have to be done with such noise? Why can't you just, slowly, quietly bring people close, make a little blog post? People that are interested, you have a website for, information desk to let them know things. Why do we have to go with such a shturim? The question people could ask. And the Rabbi says that basically we are now in history, or the time of history that we are now is at the bottom of the tunic, and it's right before Mashiach. And that generation, and our generation, we need noise. Things have to be done with noise. Things have to be done with inspiration, with passion. You can't just limp into that part of this. You have to do it with a passion, with an excitement, specifically with noise. That's the only way that we're going to be able to elevate that part of the generation. And the Rebbe continues. Another point is, like you mentioned, that all the negative forces, they do everything on high display. They have their outdoor concerts and their noise and their everything. And in order for us to refine and elevate that last part, that part of the world, where the outside, the Rosh Hashanah of the world, we also have, Yiddishkeit has to be brought there too. We can't just say, we're draw a line here, we're not going to bring, that's their domain, this is our domain. We have to bring, and we have to play with the same, there are quotes from a Maimer Chazal, that the handle of the axe, the same wood that chops the tree, is taken from the tree. In other words, wood is used to chop the tree. So in order to elevate those forces, we have to play with their game. We have to use their same game plan. The same way those elements are done publicly and loud. Now we have to bring Yiddishkeit publicly and loud. And when we do that, those bells will jingle, and that will be the last sound. But it says that, it concludes and says, well, the last sound will be the sound of the very loud shofar. You talk about shofar Gadol, God will blow the big shofar, and that will usher in the coming of Mashiach. Because this is the last vestige of what we have to do to put our world into the final phase into the Mashiach times, is doing this last element on the bottom of the meal, in the last generation, that noise, where we gather together those last sparks that are even in the outside elements.
Beautiful.
And that's the public menorah lighting, and that's the mitzvah tanks, and that's the noise and the gusto and the excitement of how we bring even Judaism to the outside.
So what I love about this sikha, and as well as Bichlal, when the Rebbe, when we look at Miftoyim, or we look at, let's say, mitzvah neshek or mezuzah or tefillin, every Miftoyim, every mission that the Rebbe wanted from us to go out there and do, everything came from Torah. So there's a story I heard from Rabbi YY that the Rebbe, how did the Rebbe share that he needed glasses? So he mentioned to Rabbi Groner that he can't see the small letters. He's having a hard time seeing the small letters in the Gemara. In other words, glasses, to have a discussion about glasses, it's a question of Torah. What do I need glasses for? I need glasses for Torah. The same thing goes with all of the Miftaim. Here we have a Sikha. The end of the Sikha, the Rebbe connects it to publicizing Torah mitzvahs, going out there on the streets. But where does it all come from? It all comes from a beautiful pilpul and chiddush and a Rashi and a Ramban, and analyzing al pi pnimis inyanim, quoting Gemaras, and building this whole beautiful masterpiece. And at the end, we have a specific mission statement for our generation, but it's all saturated with Torah, al pi nigla Torah, al pi pnimius Torah, with resources from all over. And I really connect this sikha, how we see that the Rebbe, every single detail was completely from Torah.
Absolutely. You can't, listen, you see it all over the Rebbe's Torah, but the combination of genius, little Torah chidushim, and the Torah, the derech halimit of the Rebbe here, of how he takes the Rashi and he explains that the Rashi was learning his view because he's a simple interpretation. The Rambam is the deeper, more mystical. And then he turns it around and says that within Rashi itself it is the deeper, because there's Yiddish.
Right.
All these elements is so rich, and then to bring it home like that with not just a little lesson, but like a fundamental worldview lesson of, and not only just a worldview in general, but a worldview of how this is kind of our roadmap to really end this gullus type of lesson. It is a phenomenal masterpiece, absolutely, and it's a rich. And we didn't even get into, obviously, this is not the context of this podcast. We didn't get into the footnotes and the richness that comes out of that detail as well. But this is just an unbelievable expression of the Rebbe's Torah, which never existed in the history of the world. Such a derech halimit and such a type of Torah.
So thank you, Rabbi Shmuly, for joining, for bringing on the Sikha, for bringing on air. What a beautiful episode. And hopefully we'll have you again very soon. Hatzlacha Rabba.
This is wonderful, and a lot of success with this podcast. This is an incredible podcast, and you should only continue from strength to strength and only good things.
Amen. Amen.